Hey, thanks. We got a special edition of Taking Chances coming in. I got my longtime friend coming back here, Jeremy Friedman, live from Colorado, looking like a beautiful Sunday morning out there. How you doing, Jeremy?
Doing great, man. It is beautiful out here, probably 50 degrees, and in my backyard, which is kind of my zen ground. Love being out here. So,
I know I hear the birds chirping. It's making me miss home a little bit. How's the weather been there this week too? I'm curious. Are you guys still having the bipolar Colorado spring, or is it staying nice this year?
no, it's right now it's nice. I mean, I know they had some cold days last week. There was a front that came in, but no, I mean, I was outside in my backyard working on stuff out here most of the day yesterday. It was 70 degrees. It was gorgeous. Grilled out last night with my son. It was awesome.
That's beautiful. And you just love executive leadership so much you decide to hop on a call with me Sunday morning to keep talking about work. There's something
Just
wrong
keep
with this,
going.
Jeremy. Yeah, I know, but I love us. So hey, man, I got a ton of positive feedback from our last conversation as we were talking offline, and I think we started to touch on a lot of things that I think are really crucial for candidates today, but also for clients. And I just think you have such a unique perspective. And, unfortunately, we took most of our conversation for offline. So I wanted to just kind of hop back in. We didn't get to save as much as what you were talking about from the last episode of leaving your legacy behind. But I wanted to see if you can just kind of start talking to me about that again and just see where the conversation goes, because I think that we can go in so many directions, because I just don't know how often even younger folks are hearing that today. So what does that mean to you, Jeremy? Because it definitely inflicts a whole bunch of emotional responses from me when I hear you say that. But what does it mean from your perspective?
Great question. Leaving your legacy behind, as we kind of rounded out last call or last episode, is really about looking in the rearview mirror of um, the impression you left on the people that you led, the impression you left on the environment and the company that you led. And so, Sean, while I'm kind of explaining this, start thinking to yourself, with your executive background, with your leadership background, with your time in hospitality, you've got to have a few things. I'm going to throw you an example here of where you think back and you're like, oh my God, they're still doing that. I did that. That was my DNA. And that's a real good way to say it. Leaving your DNA, and you watch crime TV, leaving your DNA may not be a good thing, but in business, it can be huge. And I think back into my days at the Brown Palace Hotel in Denver, and I can walk back into my old restaurant, Ellington's, and I can see things that I brought in, the menu layouts, the way we set the room. And then when I talk to some of my servers from 11, 12, 13 years ago, there are still things that resonate with them. And that tells me that I touched someone, that I left an impression, that I left my DNA. So kind of kicking back to you, how does that land with you? Do you remember something?
Oh, obviously. I mean, there's a ton. And I think I go in a couple different directions as soon as I think of that. And I think that's as I've aged and evolved a little bit. So obviously, leaving my legacy behind, I can give you about 1,000 stories from there. But when I first hear someone say that, it encourages me almost to like the hopefulness of where the workforce can be in America today. And what I mean by that is I just don't hear these kind of stories talked about enough. So leaving my legacy behind, one of the first things that comes into mind is, I know you're familiar with Bar Louie. I was one of the first people to roll out the Dollar Burger Night. And when we were going coast to coast, this was one of the best promotions we had. I happened to take over a unit that was the only one in a casino. So if you know the age group of casinos that like to dine, it's all over the place. But if you've got dollar burger specials, let's just say like the blue light behind me, it was a blue light special. And we had folks, when I took over that unit, you'll laugh, Jeremy. I took over that unit, but our promotion would start at 5 o'clock. At 3:45 in the afternoon, the line would
Line
start
up.
around the door in the casino. So and again, and I guess this is a good part about leaving your legacy behind too. Whenever I take over a market, it was one I was actually a general manager for, but I don't usually go in with authority at first, right? So I'm kind of going in and observe, and this was definitely the most difficult shift of my life I've ever observed. I probably still have the video on my phone from 10 years ago. So I walked in anyways, Jeremy. They would flat seat the restaurant starting at 4:45. So I think it fit about 255 tables, so around 500 people, no shit. And they would flat seat that
Oh,
restaurant. The servers would start taking orders at 4:50. And by 5 o'clock, they'd pre-hold on micros, right? And I swear to God, I walked back to the printer and I felt bad for the cooks the first time. But I looked at them, and that service printer for the kitchen went off for an hour and 45 minutes and did not stop, Jeremy.
wow.
So just quick stories about that. And this was obviously a very good one to where like the the guests can pick up on. But obviously, we changed how that sat. Everyone around me, including the vice president, like told me I was going to lose my job if I was wrong. It only took about 6 weeks. That store was up about 120% on the first Tuesday we did it, growing up to 500% for the next
Wow.
18 months that we did it. And it just kind of, and still to today, that kind of changed. That kind of changed all of the procedures for seating for Burger Night. But the other thing of what it really impacts me, and where I kind of want to give this back to you, is what I really think is the legacy I left behind when I knew I was going to leave Bar Louie. And Bar Louie for me was the favorite job I've ever had. And what was very challenging for me was knowing that I wanted to step out and do something more than they were going to allow me to do. And nothing bad about them. It's just that was the first time I really understood that, this isn't my business. And some of the things I want to change, as much as I think they're right, it's not really my business to change some of those. So I fell in really good within freedom within a framework is what we called it there. So I had the freedom to do a lot of autonomy, but still to this day on my birthday, I have probably 30 to 40 operators from Bar Louie that'll just reach out to me and thank me about impacting XYZ of their life. So this is where it's less tangible to probably have on a key performance indicator. But for me, kind of how I taught those folks to walk through a company that was in the process of going public, where none of us had the autonomy that we wanted to, and a lot of things were coming from all over the side. But we mushroomed that down into the 3 things that were important to us. Now, under that umbrella of 3 things, everything that was crucial to the organization stuck there. But all of those operators that were with me, most of them aren't still with Bar Louie, but kind of that mushroom of 3 and that umbrella effect, they're still rolling out to this day. And that's, for me, the legacy. The legacy today is on my birthday. Less friends communicate with me. I still say these folks are my friends, but a lot of folks that I've impacted their life and touched their life personally. So I guess for me, that's the first thing that comes back out.
And exactly, and that's where I'm going with this. The tangible or the transactional. Doing Dollar Burger Night is transactional. It's great. It had positive effect. But then what you did with the people, when they reach out to you, and the way you can quantify some of those things, personally or retrospectively looking in your life, is when you've raised a leader, or when you've put your time, your soul, your heart, your mentorship into a leader, they take your isms with you. They take it
Yeah.
with them. They take those things with them and they repeat them in their new environments when they're now the leader. That's that DNA and bringing it with. And I do think in this day and age in business, we talked about this on the previous time together. What the generation of workers are looking for now, that purpose, that inclusion, that investment into their future. It's not real tangible. It's more in here and in here, and you're going to affect that by giving them things that can transcend what they're doing in that particular work environment. So,
And
to give a similar story to my old mentor and boss, he created something and it wasn't so positive, it was more of a negative, but he made it funny. You heard it from what's that movie where they go to Vegas? Winner Winner Chicken Dinner. I think it was 21 with Kevin Spacey.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Winner Winner Chicken Dinner. We used to do hotel walks and inspect, public area, back of the house, rooms.
Walk
And
and talks
whoever
from
had the
all over the
worst,
world. Mhm.
exactly, and whoever had the worst area was winner winner. And you didn't want to be winner winner, but
Yeah.
it was the thought process, and I found myself taking something similar with me to my next hotel. And what it did was it created that accountability with a little bit of fun, but it was memorable. And that DNA needs to be memorable because that's what's going to be that legacy. Leaving it behind is something that people can remember and that they're going to repeat and do.
Well, and talk to me about how you've impacted that too, kind of in the transition of working into remote work. And I know remote work is such a trigger word today, but you and I chatted offline last time. I would argue that a feature of my job was remote way before it was a trigger statement. So I mean, being a multi-unit operator, multi-unit sales, a lot of my time's been on the road. And I don't think we called it remote back then. But talk to me about how you've what are some of the challenges you've seen, or have you seen some folks leaving their legacy behind, or how are you leaving your legacy behind in your current role with some of the challenges that we have?
So, I mean, I think it goes back to the start, right? When the term remote work popularized, or that definition came into kind of focus, we all know is when the world ended on March 9th. with COVID-19, right? Like everybody was at their homes, everybody was having to figure out how to do their jobs, not in the in-person work environment. I mean, at the time, if you think back to it, I don't know what the statistics are, but the majority of people drove to an office every day, drove to a
Well,
company every day.
I mean, you can see the commercial real estate like in San Francisco, New York right now for just who has not moved back in, and it's large. I don't have the numbers either, Jeremy. It's just the first thing that struck to me. But I feel like we went from 100% in person to about 10% in person. And if it wasn't necessary, it wasn't there. And I think that was a challenge for a lot of people. But it was eye opening at the same time. Some people I think the folks that embraced that kind of during the start of the transition really had success. I mean, for us, I sat there solely really just in hospitality. Now we weren't remote. We reported into an office, but we went remote the next day. That didn't really impact us. But what did is our industry was completely down. So for us, we just pivoted day 2 of that into as many industries as we could. Obviously, that planned out for us, but I still have some colleagues I think back to that just doubled down on everything they knew in day 1, and they weren't in business 6 months later.
Well, and unfortunately, that's a story a lot across, a lot of industries and a lot of companies. I think fast forward to today, I think a lot of leaders, a lot of companies have gotten their arms around this notion of remote working, but it's no longer working from home. And I think that definition has evolved. It's
Mm.
now simply people are just working from different states, or in your case, John, different country, right?
Well, I know.
And so,
Yeah.
so you're having to communicate, you're having to lead without having that physical, in-person, you know, culture build, tie-in. Sometimes we forget about how valuable it is to stand around the water cooler or around the coffee maker while your cup of coffee is brewing and just chat and say, how's your weekend? How's your grandfather doing? I heard he wasn't doing well. Is he recovering? That's all part of the culture build, and having to evolve into an environment where you're touching the people the way we are right now on this video call is really where my head is going nowadays with leadership.
And I go back and forth in this, but I mean, I'm pretty firm on a couple things. So I think for me, from my background being in hospitality, building culture is kind of built into who I am. It's into my DNA, like you said. So we're already having weekly calls, weekly one-on-ones, director calls, and so whether I'm in person or not, I'm making sure that I'm having more of those conversations with my team. I would argue that I know where most of my folks stand at any given day, even if that's not a great thing always for us, you know what I mean? But we're pretty honest on my team. So I think the hospitality endeavor and all that training, I've taken a level of hospitality to every business I've done, if I'm being honest. I want my
Sure.
guests to feel a certain way. I definitely want my employees, my contractors to feel a certain way as well. So for us, I really embraced the remote work from day one, Jeremy, but like I kind of fall on both sides because like you said, I've also been someone who fantasized about traveling the world and owning a couple businesses. And let me be honest, it's great at times, but it's very challenging. I mean, so we went on a 14-month stint for my fiance and I. We were in 9 different countries and 9 different leases in 14 months. And
Wow.
having 2 businesses at the time, I was exiting Fayhu was a bit too much, but my team was developed at that time too, and that's what I want to tell most people. So if I hadn't done a lot of what we can talk about in remote work, empowering my team, empowering my directors, really making sure everyone was aligned from my AB vision to their AB vision. Does the individual need align with the company need? We have conversations about that on a weekly basis, sometimes on a daily basis if it needs to be. So I felt like that was all firm, Jeremy, and we didn't lose too much of the water huddle, but the times, and I know you've been in recruitment firms before too. What we missed is like, it was a strange time when we closed down the office. The best office setting I had was not in my office. We closed down the office the first couple of weeks of the pandemic, and I moved everybody into my condo. So I had a nice 2-bedroom condo, 2-bedroom with an office that turned into basically like a boiler room version of, recruiting agency. And we met every day at 9 a.m. Mountain Time. And from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. was kind of our moments of clarity, so we talk about requisitions, what the goals were, clients, yada, yada. And as soon as 10 a.m. hit, though, like everyone went into their, call it cubicle, because it was a condo.
Their corner.
Yeah, it's like literally like
Go to your
Jeremy,
quarters.
Yeah, but it was it was controlled chaos. I mean, the energy in that room, so like if people had a placement, if they had win, we had a bell. So it was like hospitality, just like a tip, someone would ring the bell and they're ringing it in their friend's ear and they're like, Jesus, get it, But even the candidates heard some of that energy. And I don't mean in a bad way. It's like, so just imagine this, the world's closing down, right? The sky is falling. Everyone's going to die. And all we were talking about on my team was just the same thing. I was like, hey guys, look, like at the end of the day, we can't control any of this shit, but what we can control is the quality of candidates that we represent and the quality of clients. And that's what we focused on, Jeremy. We're still focusing on that to today. But, to get back to the remote work, I now have a team where my number one sales generators I have not seen in person with over $1 million company in 18 months.
Yeah.
I have not been in. So I kind of see both sides of that, but I'm curious. Like the thing I want to tie this together, I guess, for this conversation for the clients that are listening and maybe for the candidates, what I don't hear enough today, I can look at a candidate coming in and applying and I can see where they've jumped from job to job. And I certainly understand that more than some of the clients. But I hope that from the candidate side, that they can understand that they can leave a client with more impact. Because I will say right now, the language on LinkedIn, I do think is fictitiously leaning towards the candidate side. And I see a lot of candidates being very upset because they're listening to bullshit from recruiter influencers who are regurgitating bad information. So I think a candidate can still go into a great SDR position and say, hey, my vision is not to be an SDR for 2 years. But for 18 months, talk to me about your KPIs. I want to see if I can build myself into a sales manager role within your institution. And if I did not, then I'm going to impact your organization so well that your next 5 SDRs are going to do it the way that I did. And I think that's some of the stuff that you were talking about.
No, and it was, it is that, and actually it links back to your leaving your legacy behind. I'm going to do it so well that the next 5 are going to do it the same way. But in terms of the remote working and kind of also encapsulating or putting our arms around executive leadership, which is a lot of where you and I target a lot of our conversations, because I know some of the listeners here, you are leaders and you're leading high value executives, you're leading mid-level and all the way down to line level leaders, and leadership can be a mindset a bit, where leader doesn't have to be a title. But going back to this remote work, I think executive leaders and leaders alike need to understand that guiding your team takes thought and it takes purpose. And then you need to give purpose to your team, especially when you're not there to stand over their desk or sit down next to them and check in with them. There's a certain amount of trust. There's a certain amount of direction that needs to be given. And then there's that accountability follow-up to ensure that those things, inspect what you inspect. We've all heard that term. And so, when the world ended for us and we were getting everybody, and at the time, everybody was in fact working from home, not just necessarily from a different state or a different city. They were working from home. Every morning, my leadership and I would get on a Teams call, and as to coin your term, that moment of clarity, it was to give purpose. And I remember we talked a lot about Shackleton. Ernest Shackleton was a explorer in the early 1900s, and he had an expedition where his ship got stuck in Antarctica, and he had to keep his troops alive. And he's successful because he was able to keep the troops going and keep them alive, and it was from giving them purpose. This morning we're gonna all polish our shoes. Today we're gonna swab the deck. Today we're gonna inventory the stock room, whatever the case may be. But it was a direction. It kept people motivated. It gave people a target. It gave them purpose every day, so that they're not thinking about, as you said, Chicken Little, the sky is falling. It's guiding them.
Let me ask you that. How have you been giving people purpose in kind of your daily operations? So like what, and I guess maybe talk to me about the time, and maybe, I don't think I've asked you this before, Jeremy, do you see any difference from giving people purpose before the pandemic into today? Because I think even as I'm saying this and we're having this conversation, I really don't. And I think sometimes subconsciously we try to put these like checkpoints in of like, it's pre-pandemic, post-pandemic. I'm still leading people the same way. Challenge was they weren't around me, but I was doing a lot of the same faculties of if they were around me.
No, and There is some differences. Obviously, my team is out on the road. They're in front of clients in person. Where I see the difference is, or where I see the connective tissue is what they learned to do was how to manage their clients effectively over the phone, over Teams, make them feel cared for in that hospitality realm. Being a servant leader, being able to give the clients what they needed before they could be in person with them. And now in this day and age, the way that I give my team purpose every day is is just following up and ensuring that they have clear direction of what the expectations are for the day, for the week, but then also, you know, having them give back to me, what are their needs? What do they need to do? And I know that that sounds simple, but so many times leaders don't communicate regularly that expectation. And without communicating that expectation regularly, it lacks
Well,
importance.
and Jeremy, I don't want to interrupt you, but I want to hop in on there so I don't forget it. Because I find that if people have great standard operating procedures for operations and HR, then those things do happen very organically. My challenge to that would be consulting for massive brands is that if you don't have SOPs, nothing happens organically. I had a great leader in the past. It's like, hey, look, as long as we put something on the calendar, we'll make it happen. But if we don't have an organized calendar, it's never going to happen. And I was probably like 22 at the time. And I'm like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. No shit if that guy wasn't the smartest guy I've ever met just for saying that. So if you plan something, it's going to happen. If you give someone purpose and then you're aligning to that daily purpose and you're redefining, and I would say, allowing the conversation to happen as a conversation, right? It's two people that make a circle. So if one person's talking and one person's just listening and not communicating, that's not a conversation. But
Correct.
we talk a lot about like what is a merit increase. Well, it should be a conversation around performance, key performance indicators. Hopefully, a great brand is having at least a solid one-on-one with any manager position at least once a period. Specifically needs to happen once a quarter. No one should ever be surprised by these. So I guess my pushback, Jeremy, would be not really pushing back. I think it comes more organically to folks like you and I. And I don't even know if it was in my DNA or if my years of hospitality kind of built that in, but I do think the level up. I've been super aware that my special sauce is I can build world-class teams, not only for other people, but around myself. And I resonate so much with what you're talking about. I have such a unique group of people that work for HCR. I've got two people who own other businesses that are full-time recruiters for me. Most people wouldn't be okay with that. But what we've really done is I've connected their A to B with HCR's A to B with Sean Coe's A to B. And if that was in alignment from day one, then we can go to the moon. But that requires us to have a ton of conversations to nurture and foster those relationships, and well aware that, hey, as a young person or an old person even, but those A-B visions can change, and that's okay. And the clients that have great retention right now, what I would say, Jeremy, they're flexible. I'm not going to say that, I can't say they're fully remote and I can't say they're fully in person, but I think they're flexible to where the world is right now, and they understand their people and they're willing to take a step in the middle to secure top line performance. Do you see some of that with some of the folks you're working with too, or?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think flexibility has become a key in terms of uh, not pigeonholing yourself so that you can get the right person. But to kind of go back to what you were saying in terms of conversation in that full circle, yes, you're right. Some people can do it organically, some leaders can do it organically, and some people it takes work and it takes focus on doing that. So, yeah, and I would say that some leaders are natural leaders and other people have to work at it. They're both effective
And
leaders,
that's
but some
okay.
people have to consciously think of it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, you know, in terms of where I see great leadership, either coming to me and the people that I look to for guidance, uh, and also how I pivot to my team and how to make them stronger is not forgetting that just because you've got a wildly successful, wildly capable individual, uh, that they don't need that touch. They don't need that conversation, that communication to remind them where their ship needs to be pointed. And
Well,
you said it also is in terms of your team knowing the direction you want to go in. I think it's very, very important, and it sounds simple because it kind of is. If you don't make your goals and your direction known, and then make your team's goals feed your goals, you're never going to accomplish what you're looking for. And they will move. It's a moving target. Things are going to change
As
in
long
life.
as long as they move congruently, like with the team, the team's got to be kind of following
Correct.
that behind. Yeah, I'm with you there. And that's the only time we really can't help an organization too much is if there's an unalignment in the ownership group or the board of directors, which to the listeners listening to this, you might be surprised how often that happens. It's more
Sure.
common than not. But I think the folks, a couple things come to mind when we're having this conversation because this is real world to me, Jeremy. And I know it's real world to you too. But I go on both ends of talking to candidates on a daily basis. I can tell you these things. A candidate that is willing to be flexible, whether they're hybrid or being in person, you're going to have a much more devastating chance of gaining employment right now. You might not want to hear that, but that's just where it is. To the clients that are out there, if you're willing to be flexible within an area, if you're able to be, and when I say if you're able to be, we're in hospitality. Some positions don't have that flexibility of being able to be remote. And I do see that some of those positions that have never had that luxury just because of the nature, those are the ones that are on the most understaffed right now. So I think it's a challenging thing to a lot of folks, but to really speak to the board of directors out there, one of the things that we do for all clients, Jeremy, but specifically on our dedicated talent partnership, is really align the U.S. jobs report to talent mapping into their market. And, we've had to walk away from some really big MSPs that just wanted to have fully in-person teams. And I wouldn't argue that that's not the best plan for them, but just for where the world was. So what we do with the U.S. jobs report is with the tax paying codes, we can see to where how many candidates live within a certain area, backlogged by about 3 months, being paid from their individual tax codes. So what we've seen post pandemic is there's a lot of folks for the first time ever, living somewhere, working X, we'll just leave it at that way. So I think for a lot of clients, even if you're not working with an external recruitment company, to talk to your internal talent acquisition teams. I just see too many brands that aren't talent mapping right now, Jeremy, and they're not really aware of where the candidates live or not. And if you're having this conversation without having a line of sight on the personnel in your backyard, you're putting the cart before the horse. So I just think there's a lot of tomfoolery out there, and I think that this can be a subjective conversation, but it should be an objective one. And to start off objectively, you first have to see the level of personnel. And I'm talking to the owners, founders, and leaders now. Who is in my backyard, and can I do this? So if I want to get back to fully in person, what are some strategies I could do? Well, let's talk about relocating some top talent from X over to our state, and let's build around that and support. So I get less, Jeremy, I guess, of a black and white, because I don't live in a black and white world for myself. And with the multitude of clients we have, we've got to be able to fit in there. But I think if everyone can kind of take a step in the middle, and for the candidates to come in, everybody knows what's going on. Whether you want to hear this or not, if you've had 5 opportunities in the last 2 years, we can still help you, but you got to be able to have a firm conversation around the whys. And I think for the hiring managers to hear this, it's not, excuse my language, it's not 1995. There has been a pandemic. There's a world shutdown. People have relocated, and we've got to be a little more understanding to what's happened in the last 2 years. Because what I see right now, Jeremy, is a lot of probably shouldn't say this in this one, but just like our politics, people are drawing a line in the sand on both sides, and I don't think that's helping either one. So.
Well, and I'd agree with you, and where I would take it even a step further and to kind of bring it back into the team you have or the team you're building. There's a lot of great talent out there for sure, and you're never going to find out how effective that talent is going to be unless you give them a chance and then also have a plan and a purpose-driven plan to bring them in. We talked about this, I think, before and certainly offline about companies and their lack of training and onboarding and learning objectives and things of that nature. That all comes back into what I'm talking about here in this remote world. Part of those expectations, part of that purpose needs to be guidance, training, objectives, because you can't assume your team knows how to do all of those things. Now, you can give them that baseline orientation when they start, but that's a living, breathing, fluid activity for a leader, and especially an executive leader. You want your team to perform, you've got to invest that time, both remotely and in person, in the gray world we live in, both remotely and in person, to get the best out of those people.
I know you can see me leaning on my chair because you just excited me so much. taking it even a step further, the leaders don't even know how to coach that, Jeremy. I think that's where we are in the world. I literally have had too many conversations with folks where I feel like it's insecurity to where there's a huge gap right now. I don't think people are approaching it with arms wide open to learn, but I also don't think there's proper education out there right now to, hey, how do you have a fully functioning hybrid team? How do you have someone that's who should never be remote? Who could always be remote? Where's the happy in between? And how do you put this together? I do see that again, and my opinions about a lot of things, but I think in America specifically right now, we just draw lines in the sand around too many conversations, and we just tend to get on the extreme. But I think right here, there's a massive gap that if we could approach this again, I'm a firm believer in education. I think if you give an honest person the right education, they'll make the right decisions. I don't care what the subject matter is about. And I think if we can start with educating the leaders about, hey, look, let's have some case studies of folks who had a fully remote team, who have not had a fully remote team, and let's see how did they track through the pandemic. For the folks who are still remote, how are they tracking today? Because I think if we put some key performance indicators around that with some education, I think we can start moving the needle. Because for me, I got to tell you, Jeremy, like the pandemic's over. I'm obviously at my location in Bucharest. I know undoubtedly I'm going to open another office when I get back. What I can also tell you, though, is my remote team, I'm never going to force to come back in. And again, we've got a little bit of unique building and hitting all kinds of different aspects. But with that, that's kind of my takeaway. I see the benefits of both sides, and to the point of what you said before, the benefits of being flexible enough to figuring out a way to have a killer that wants to crush for my team and for themselves, to find a way to get them on my team. And I think if more leaders started to do that, I think the staffing opportunities would be a little better for some folks.
I agree with you. And because we have moved past the pandemic and the world has opened back up, there is, in my opinion, there is a responsibility of leaders to get to their remote team. So if you're not going to have a home office that you're going to bring them to, you need to get yourself out there and you need to get in front of them.
Yeah.
You need to be with them in the field. You need to be alongside of them because, again, in building that culture, some people may push back. You may push back at me, Shaun, but there is nothing better to building a culture than one-to-one, right next to each other, connective tissue. It is harder to do it remotely. You don't need to do it all the time. We learned that. Over
Yep.
the last 3.5 years. You don't have to do it all the time. But there is no replacement to driving from client to client, or sitting down to lunch, or meeting in a boardroom and having that ancillary feel to building that team. And again, I come back to those learning objectives and that initial orientation with what you're doing, and you know, demonstrating to your team members that you can be their leader. Again, it's a two-way choice. You're doing it because you're in a titled position in your company to onboard people and to train them. Where it's the two-way street is they have to accept you as a leader and want to follow your direction, your purpose. Otherwise, they're going to leave, right? So that first impression and building a clearly defined and structured training and onboarding and orientation is really, really key. And then you're purpose driven when they go remote, when they go back home, when they go back to their cities, when they go back to their countries. That follow up, whether it be daily, weekly, whatever your cadence is, needs to echo back to those objectives, those learning objectives, and the goals of the company every single day. It needs to echo back.
And that's what I've seen too. It's like the brands that had to go remote for whatever reason, and I mean, that was almost all of them, but they just stopped thinking about SOPs. It's like, shit, here's a curveball. Let's not swing at it and let's throw everything out, the baby with the bathwater, like let's forget all the good practices we did. And that's for me, I see it the same way. I really don't see there being many challenges. So to go back to the first thing you said, I'll never push back on that. The number one thing I miss right now is once a period we were going to, my Denver team to Barcelona Wine Bar for happy hour. I'm probably saving quite a bit of money right now. Who knows? Maybe we'd be up even a little bit more in sales if we were still driving it and having that time. But, you always miss the culture piece of being in person. But like you said too, we're still getting together once a year as a team. But as we're saying all these things, like I definitely want to invite you back on for another one, because I just think I'm realizing this in the conversation that there's not a lot of information out there for leaders or for candidates. And typically we are coming into not not a combative conversation with my team, but let's just say the teams that we're talking to are a little already beat up over this subject. So even if we're talking about remote, that's a question that every client, we have about 10 to 15 client calls a period, new client calls. And it's one of the first two questions that every client, it doesn't matter what space they're from, even if they're from manufacturing, it's like, hey, the manufacturing world wants to know, could we move some of our personnel to partially remote so we could start to move this back? So I think, I'd love to get you back on, Jeremy, and talk a little bit more about some of the best practices. What I think will happen with those conversations too is, at least for myself, when I look back through my training modality from pre-pandemic to today, nothing's changed other than the word Zoom. So all the same habits, all of the same timestamps, all of the same culture. To your point, we've pulled through to remote. I can't have the monthly happy hours. We did it virtually once in a while. I would say that's not as fun. That's one feedback I could give. Drinking with someone on camera is not as fun as having a conversation. But what do you? I mean, in your world, because I know you're dealing with more hospitality, is the remote conversation something coming from clients a lot? Like, because we're in a similar world, but it's a different world. So I'm just curious to see how much of your days filled up with these kind of combos.
Well, what I would say is, working primarily with hotels,
Mm-hmm.
and primarily line level staff. Those are frontline workers. They are
Always
on
in
the
person.
ground. They are in the property. Where I have seen some of my peers from the hotel world, I know a lot of HR leaders who have gone hybrid. They spend some time working from home, and they often feel like that's their most productive time because if you've ever worked in HR,
Yeah,
um, you know, your door is literally and
always
and
open.
and, and physically always open, and you get nothing done because everybody's marching in there. Especially, and I would argue, especially when you're hybrid, because now they've waited 3 days to get to you,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
right?
yeah, and they're lined up at the
So
door.
I think from a sales perspective, I think salespeople are starting to be, I think major hospitality companies have figured out that they can have a salesperson, a business travel salesperson, for example, working in one location, quote unquote, remotely, and overseeing a dozen or a region of hotels and doing it for all these hotels rather than back in the days when I was literally in hotels. Your BT person was doing it for your hotel,
Yeah,
not other hotels. It was for your hotel. And I think that they've expanded that bandwidth. But
stretch the
go ahead.
supervision a little bit. No, just like stretch the supervision a little bit. Is that a good way to say it?
I mean, I think stretch the supervision, but you know, how long does it really take to set up a business travel group for a courtyard that has 150 rooms versus a Renaissance that has 250 rooms, right? So you can fill your day with more, if you're expanded along multiple properties as opposed to one individual property for sure. But to go to your point, and I would love to continue to come back on and chat with you. I think these are great. You know, you said something earlier in this conversation about knowing how to build those learning objectives, knowing how to build that. And I really think you and I have an opportunity to kind of dive into that a little bit deeper of kind of how to plot out that training and development and understanding that it's always going to evolve because you and I as leaders in our respective fields, we learn stuff new every day. We read a book,
Yeah,
we see something out in
yeah,
the field, we talk to a peer, and they share something with us. We're like, oh my God, I got to update my training and give this to my team. This is so valuable. I got to give it to my team. And I think a lot of companies either by excuse say that they don't have the bandwidth or they simply just don't know how to build the learning objectives to give purpose to then do the things we were just talking about with the remote world of guiding those people once they're in the field, once they're doing their jobs. It all comes back to before they're doing their job.
always. And I love that, and we have to do that. And one step even further, I'd love to give some education not only to the clients but also to the candidates because I want the candidates to hear this as well. I promise you, you can influence the leadership with results. So I think coming in with the right kind of knowledge of maybe the pain points of also connecting the dots for the candidate and clients to have a real conversation too. So why does like let's narrow it down to the individual job. Why does this one specific job have to be in person? Perhaps there's features that it needs to be, Perhaps it could also be hybrid for some parts. And I can tell you just a part that really sparked from the last conversation you had with me there is really I think a lot of brands got exposed to a lot of the stuff we do is good, right? But I think some of the meetings we were having and some of the in-person stuff as well, it might have just been fluff, And I think we talked about this offline the last time, but I think for us too, I was able to maybe take 30% of what was filling the day. That was good with good intentions, but it wasn't really impactful. And I think it just forced a lot of leaders to kind of look firm about what they had to do to get through. But I think it was subjective that people were trying to get through a very, a predefined period of time, 2 weeks to end the curve, and it was two years. But now I think what people don't understand is if you really look at this, we're going over 3 years of, let's say, someone that just graduated college, very influential years in the start of their workforce. How we've influenced some folks, I don't think that influence changes for a generation, if it ever does. So I think that my personal take is the world's not going to change. I can't predict, Jeremy, if the world's going to go fully remote or fully back in. I think it's going to be a little bit of both. But I
Yep.
do think that the world is aching right now for some proper education about how to first approach this. And I would love to have more conversations with you because I think from our unique perspective, really talking to some national, international clients. And I mean, man, look, I've got some of the UK clients I represent were just on the 4-day work week. And this is a conversation for another time. But let me just share with you, a lot of them have increased productivity and sales with being on a reduced schedule. So, I'm just where I sit here with all these conversations today is I don't think this conversation is far from being over, but I kind of want to give it back to you to talk to me a little bit about, and maybe we can pick up on another conversation here. So this STR, little acronym you're working with. So does any of the stuff that we're talking about today kind of fit in with some of those visions you have as well?
Well, it does. I mean, STR is really a communication tool that I think some people organically kind of embrace. Really where it came to me is we have all in our years of being, in our careers, have all run across somebody who's leading you through SMART goals. You remember SMART
Yeah,
goals?
yeah, yeah.
Specific and measurable and all of that. What's the one problem with SMART goals, Sean, that you can remember from doing them yourself, back in the day? What's the one major thing that stands out to you about SMART goals?
Uh, if I'm being honest, most people don't use them, but I mean, it's probably not the question you're
That's
looking for,
it.
but the
That
timeliness,
that
yeah, but
Yeah, that was the answer. You do
okay.
it. You have some HR guru come in and have your team all riled up, and everybody sits down and does their SMART goals, and then nobody goes back to them, and there's no accountability, there's no follow up, so forth. The notion is a good one. I mean, the acronym itself is fine. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's not used. But from a communication standpoint, STR, taking three of the acronyms or three of the letters from SMART goals, specific, timely, and realistic. This should be something that's in communication. I know it sounds simple, but it should be in part of communication, both in your personal and professional life. And I think we don't do enough of that. So an example I could give from a business example is your boss says to you, "Hey, I need that revenue report."
Mhm.
And then he comes back to you 2 hours later and says, "Hey, Sean, where's that revenue report? You didn't tell me what time you needed it, you know? And was that timing realistic with the other things that you had going on? It was specific, it was a revenue report, but again, then you get in trouble, people are upset. And that sounds simple, but it is. And I think in practicing STR in communication, and we can dive into this more with a million examples, you're going to have a better job communicating with your team, them understanding what your expectations are as far as time, as far as the realistic nature of getting things done. They're able to communicate back. I'm not going to be able to do that for these reasons, or I can do that because for these reasons. But again, the small stuff is sometimes the most important things
I agree.
in leadership.
Well, and even I think a place I'd like to go with this conversation as well, Jeremy, and this might be my unique perspective because I've been living outside the United States. I think culturally we've gotten very appeasing over the last 10 years. I don't think this is a pandemic thing, but I think culturally, me getting outside I'll put it this way, go to Amsterdam, hang out with Netherlands folks or Romanian folks, very direct. And again, I'm from New York, so going from New York to Colorado, I would say people are a lot less direct in Colorado, but maybe people are too direct in New York. But just the subtlety and the nuances of our conversation, I think that it's been, at least from my perspective, it's very difficult for people to be really authentic with one another. And I think sometimes we talked about this before offline is sometimes a good conversation might have to be confrontational, and confrontational isn't always a bad word, you know. And I think that if you're really going to address opportunities, you've got to be direct, you've got to be honest in those communication. And I think this can spin off into so many different different avenues of conversation. But Jeremy, it's always a joy to have you on, man. I think you're a wealth of knowledge. Hopefully, you know, the guests that are listening get some good information from here. I think as we continue to have these conversations and maybe these special editions of Taking Chances, though, I think we're going to be able to give a lot of nuggets out. You know, I know for myself, I really want to be able to impact not just the clients but also the candidate world. And you know, Jeremy, I know I think that resonates with you as well. And who knows, maybe we can pull off some really good education. And instead of drawing lines in the sand like everybody else does, maybe we can try to educate from both ends, and then maybe encourage the candidates and the clients to step in the middle when it makes sense. So I appreciate you being here, Jeremy. Anything you want to leave the folks with before we get you back on again?
No, Sean, I really appreciate it. I love doing this with you, and I appreciate being invited back. And looking forward to the next time we chat for Taking Chances.
Well, one of these times we'll be in person too, and hopefully I'll be back in the great state of Colorado when we return
There
home.
you
But
go. There you go. We can do it in my backyard. It's nice.
I needed Zen Den, man. I needed Zen Den. I'll have to show you for mine for the next one. But I appreciate you being here, Jeremy. Again, we'll link all Jeremy's socials below. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys, and stay tuned for the next Taking Chances.
Thanks, Sean.